the first time she arrived in Whispering Creek, Montana. Matilda Owens felt as though she'd stepped through the back of her wardrobe into a strange, intimidating world where everyone seemed to have memorized a script she'd never seen. The year was 1878, and the sprawling Montana territory was as wild as the rumors that had reached her small Minnesota hometown. Matilda clutched her valise tightly against her chest as she stepped down from the stagecoach, her navy blue traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of dust from the 3-day journey. At 22, she'd never ventured farther than 20 miles from her family's farm, but her father's illness and mounting debts had forced her hand. The advertisement had seemed like Providence, seeking bride for established rancher. Passage paid. "This must be her," a woman's shrill voice cut through the bustle of the small town's main street. "The mail-order bride for the Watson place." Matilda felt her cheeks flush crimson as several heads turned in her direction. She kept her eyes downcast, studying the worn toes of her boots as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "You're the Minnesota gal." A plump woman with graying hair twisted into a severe bun approached, eyeing Matilda with unconcealed curiosity. "I'm Mrs. Henrietta Powell, head of the Ladies' Aid Society. We've been expecting you." Matilda managed a nod, words sticking in her throat like molasses in January. "Cat got your tongue, girl?" Mrs. Powell leaned closer, her breath smelling of peppermint and coffee. "You'll need to speak up in these parts. Quiet folk get overlooked." "Yes, madam," Matilda whispered, finally raising her gaze to meet the older woman's. "I'm Matilda Owens, pleased to make your acquaintance." Mrs. Powell's eyebrows shot up. "Well, at least she can talk, ladies," she called over her shoulder to a small cluster of women who had gathered nearby. Though Mr. Watson might need an ear trumpet to hear her, the ladies tittered, and Matilda felt her chest tighten. It had always been this way, her soft-spoken nature mistaken for dullness or disinterest. Back home, her 3 boisterous sisters had always spoken for her, shielding her from the necessity of raising her voice. But they weren't here now. No one was. "Mr. Watson sent a message," Mrs. Powell continued. "He's held up at the ranch with some trouble with the herd. His foreman, Mr. Nolan, will collect you tomorrow morning. You'll stay at my boarding house tonight." Matilda nodded again, trying to quell the rising panic in her stomach. One more day before meeting the man, she was meant to marry a stranger whose only communication had been a terse letter accepting her response to his advertisement, and a money order for her passage west. The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building with lace curtains in the windows and a wide porch furnished with several rocking chairs. Inside, the parlor was cluttered with mismatched furniture and potted ferns, the air heavy with the scent of baking bread and furniture polish. "You'll take the blue room upstairs," Mrs. Powell instructed, leading the way. "Supper's at 6 sharp. The other ladies will want to meet you, I expect." The blue room was small but neat, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. Matilda sank onto the edge of the bed once Mrs. Powell left, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. What had she done? What madness had possessed her to travel halfway across the country to marry a man she'd never met? But the answer was simple: desperation. Her father's consumption had worsened last winter, leaving him bedridden and unable to work the farm. The doctor's bills mounted, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. When she'd seen the advertisement in the newspaper, it had seemed like the only way to send money home regularly enough to save her family. Supper that evening was an ordeal of smiles that didn't reach curious eyes and questions that felt more like interrogations. "So you're to marry old Watson," a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Cartwright said over roast beef and potatoes. "He's been a widower these past 5 years, keeps to himself mostly. Not much of a talker yourself, are you?" Another woman chimed in. "That might suit him just fine." "She's shy as a field mouse," Mrs. Powell announced to the table at large. "Haven't heard her string more than 5 words together yet." "A shy bride in the Montana territory," Mrs. Cartwright laughed, the sound like brittle leaves crunching underfoot. You'll need to find your voice quickly, girl. This is no place for the timid. Matilda felt her appetite vanish. She'd always been the quiet one, the listener. Her teachers had praised her penmanship and reading but lamented her reluctance to recite in class. Her mother had often sighed, "If only you'd speak up, Matilda. No one will notice you otherwise." But being noticed had never been Matilda's aim. She preferred the shadows, the spaces between conversations where she could observe and think without the pressure of performance. She excused herself as soon as politeness allowed, retreating to her room where she sat by the window, watching twilight settle over the small town. Tomorrow she would meet Mr. Watson's foreman. A week from now she'd be married. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. Morning came with a clear sky and the sound of horses in the street below. Matilda had slept poorly, her dreams filled with faceless men and laughing women pointing at her silence. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a dove-gray cotton with tiny pearl buttons down the bodice. Her hair, the color of chestnuts, she coiled into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Mrs. Powell was waiting in the parlor, along with several other women who seemed to have materialized solely to witness Matilda's departure. "Your escort is here," Mrs. Powell announced, "and it's not the foreman after all." Before Matilda could process this information, the front door opened, and a man ducked through the frame, removing his hat as he did so. He was tall, the first thing Matilda noticed, with shoulders that filled the doorway and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days outdoors. His hair was the deep black of a raven's wing, and his eyes, when they found hers, were the startling blue of a summer sky. "Miss Owens." His voice was deep but gentle, with none of the gruffness she'd expected. "I'm Victor Nolan. I've come to bring you to the ranch." Not the foreman, then, Matilda thought with confusion. Mr. Watson himself. But no, the last name was wrong. Mrs. Powell stepped forward. "This is Mr. Watson's neighbor, Miss Owens. Mr. Watson sent word this morning that he's still detained with ranch business." Victor Nolan nodded, his gaze never leaving Matilda's face. "There's been some trouble with rustlers. Mr. Watson thought it best if I escorted Miss Owens, as my ranch borders his to the north." "How thoughtful," Mrs. Powell said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "Though it seems peculiar he wouldn't come himself to collect his bride." Matilda finally found her voice. "It's quite all right," she said softly. "I appreciate the escort, Mr. Nolan." He smiled then, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Matilda's heart skip a beat. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Owens. Are you ready to depart? It's about a 2-hour ride to the Watson place." After gathering her valise and saying her goodbyes, which consisted mainly of enduring more comments about her quiet nature and warnings about the harshness of ranch life, Matilda followed Victor Nolan outside to where a wagon waited. "I thought a wagon would be more comfortable than horseback for your first journey," he explained, helping her up to the seat. "Though I hope you can ride. It's almost a necessity out here." "I can ride," Matilda said, surprising herself with the ease of the conversation. Something about Victor Nolan made the words come more readily. "My father kept horses for plowing." Victor smiled again as he climbed up beside her. "That's good to hear. The Watson place is 15 miles from town, and the nearest neighbor that would be me is 5 miles beyond that. It can get lonely without the means to visit others." As they set off, the town quickly gave way to open prairie, the landscape so vast and endless that Matilda felt simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. Wheatgrass swayed in the breeze, creating the illusion of a golden-green sea stretching to the horizon. In the distance, mountains rose blue and mysterious against the sky. "It's beautiful," Matilda whispered. Victor glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "It is. Though it can be unforgiving too. Winters are harsh, and summers bring drought and sometimes fires. It takes a certain kind of person to love it here." "Are you that kind of person, Mr. Nolan?" The question slipped out before Matilda could consider its propriety. He laughed, the sound rich and pleasant. I am born and raised in these parts. My father started our ranch with just 20 head of cattle and a dream. Now we run over 500 head on 2,000 acres. That's impressive. It's home, he said simply. What about you, Miss Owens? What brings a young lady from Minnesota all the way to Montana territory to marry a man she's never met? The directness of the question startled her, but there was no judgment in his tone, only genuine curiosity. My father is ill, she explained. The farm, we were going to lose it. Mr. Watson's advertisement seemed like providence. Victor's expression sobered. I see, that's admirable, Miss Owens, sacrificing for your family that way. He paused, then added more carefully, Mr. Watson is a decent man, keeps to himself, as you might have heard. His first wife died in childbirth, along with the baby. It was hard on him. Matilda absorbed this information, her anxiety rising again. The ladies in town seem to think my quiet nature might be a problem. Victor's hands tightened on the reins, and for a moment he looked almost angry. People talk too much and listen too little in my experience, he said finally. There's nothing wrong with being thoughtful about your words. The simple defense warmed something inside Matilda that had been cold since her arrival. Thank you, Mr. Nolan. They traveled in companionable silence for a time, the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the creak of the wagon creating a soothing backdrop. Matilda found herself studying Victor Nolan's profile when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the fan of lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. May I ask how old Mr. Watson is? Matilda ventured eventually. Victor hesitated, and Matilda's stomach dropped. He's 52, he finally said. Does that concern you? It did, though Matilda wasn't sure she could admit it. She'd known her future husband would likely be older, established, but she'd pictured someone in his 30s perhaps, not old enough to be her father. I'm sure Mr. Watson has many fine qualities, she said diplomatically. Victor's expression was unreadable again. He does. He's honest and hardworking, not a drinking man, which is rare enough in these parts. They crested a small rise, and Victor pointed to the east. That's the Watson place, just ahead. Matilda followed his gesture to see a collection of buildings nestled in a valley beside a meandering creek. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a two-story structure with a broad porch and several outbuildings scattered around it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they drew closer, she could make out figures moving about, ranch hands at work. It's bigger than I imagined, she admitted. Watson's one of the more successful ranchers in the territory, Victor said. Started with nothing, just like my father, built it all himself. There was respect in his voice, but something else too, something Matilda couldn't quite identify. As they approached the ranch, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes to watch their arrival. He was of medium height with a stocky build, his hair gray and thinning beneath his hat. Even from a distance, Matilda could see that his face was deeply lined, weathered by years of sun and wind. That's him, Victor said quietly. Emerson Watson. Matilda's hands twisted in her lap, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was at the moment she'd been both dreading and anticipating for weeks. The man she'd agreed to marry, to build a life with, to share a bed with. The thought sent heat flooding to her face. Victor must have sensed her distress because he placed his hand briefly over hers. It'll be all right, Miss Owens, he said, his voice low and reassuring. Just be yourself. The wagon rolled to a stop, and Victor jumped down, coming around to help Matilda descend. Her legs felt wooden, and she was grateful for the steadying strength of his hands at her waist. Watson, Victor called in greeting. I've brought your bride safe and sound from town. Emerson Watson approached, his gait stiff, favoring his right leg slightly. Up close, he looked even older than Matilda had first thought. His face was deeply tanned and creased, his eyes a faded blue beneath bushy gray eyebrows. He studied Matilda with an intensity that made her want to shrink into the ground. Miss Owens, he said finally, his voice gruff but not unkind. Welcome to my home. "Thank you, Mr. Watson," Matilda managed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Watson's expression softened slightly. "You must be tired after your journey. Come inside and my housekeeper will show you to your room. We can talk more at supper." Victor cleared his throat. "I should be getting back to my own place. Unless you need anything else, Watson." A look passed between the two men that Matilda couldn't interpret. "No, that's all, Nolan. Thanks for fetching the girl." "Miss Owens," Victor corrected, a hint of steel in his voice. Watson frowned but nodded. "Miss Owens, yes, thank you." Victor turned to Matilda, his expression softening. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Owens. I hope you'll settle in well here." "Thank you for everything, Mr. Nolan," Matilda said, surprised by how much she meant it. In the short time they'd spent together, he'd done more to ease her fears than anyone since she'd left home. As he climbed back into the wagon, Victor tipped his hat to her. "We're neighbors now, Miss Owens. I expect we'll be seeing more of each other." Matilda watched him drive away with a strange hollowness in her chest before turning to follow Mr. Watson into the house that would soon be her home. The interior of the Watson house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid, well-made furniture and colorful rag rugs scattered across the pine floors. The housekeeper, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Finch, showed Matilda to a pleasant room on the second floor with a view of the distant mountains. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Finch informed her. "Mr. Watson takes punctuality seriously." Left alone, Matilda unpacked her few belongings and changed into a fresh dress, her mind whirling with impressions. Mr. Watson seemed decent enough if taciturn. The ranch was clearly prosperous. She would have security here, the ability to send money home to her family. It was everything she'd hoped for when she answered the advertisement. So why did she feel this nagging sense of disappointment? The image of Victor Nolan's smile floated unbidden into her mind, and she pushed it firmly away. It was foolish to dwell on a man she'd just met, especially when she was days away from marrying another. Victor had merely been kind to a stranger, nothing more. Supper that evening was a quiet affair, with Mr. Watson asking perfunctory questions about her journey and her family back home. Matilda answered as best she could, but the conversation never flowed naturally, punctuated by long silences that grew increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm not much for talking," Watson said finally as Mrs. Finch cleared away the dishes. "Never have been. My first wife, Eliza, she was the talker in the family." "I understand," Matilda said softly. "I've never been very talkative myself." Watson nodded, seeming pleased by this admission. "That's good. Can't abide chattering women, too much like magpies for my taste." After supper, he showed her around the main floor of the house, pointing out the parlor, his study, and the kitchen with brief, almost military precision. There was no warmth in the tour, no sense that he was showing her a home they would share, merely a catalog of rooms and their functions. "The wedding will be Saturday," he informed her as they returned to the parlor. "Pastor Miller will come out from town, nothing fancy, just the legal necessities." "Saturday," Matilda echoed, "just 4 days away." "That seems soon." Watson frowned slightly. "No point in waiting, you're here now, unless there's some objection you haven't mentioned." "No," Matilda said quickly. "No objection, Saturday is fine." He nodded once, satisfied. "Good. I'll be up at dawn tomorrow. Mrs. Finch will show you the routines of the household." And with that, he bid her good night and retired to his study, leaving Matilda alone in the parlor with her thoughts. The next few days passed in a blur of introductions to ranch hands, tours of outbuildings, and lessons in the running of the household from Mrs. Finch. Mr. Watson was largely absent, busy with ranch work, appearing only at mealtimes where their conversations remained stilted and brief. Matilda tried to imagine herself as mistress of this house, as Mrs. Watson, but the image refused to form clearly in her mind. There was nothing objectionable about Mr. Watson. He was fair to his workers, kept a good home, and had never been anything but respectful toward her. But there was also no spark, no warmth, no sense of connection beyond their practical arrangement. On Friday afternoon, the day before the wedding, Matilda was sitting on the porch, attempting to mend one of her dresses when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. A rider was coming up the drive, and even at a distance, she recognized the broad shoulders and easy seat of Victor Nolan. Her heart quickened traitorously as he dismounted and approached the porch, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. "Miss Owens," he greeted her, his smile as warm as she remembered. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Nolan," she said, setting aside her sewing. "Mr. Watson is out checking the north pasture with the foreman." "Actually, I came to see you," Victor said, settling into the chair beside her. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." The simple kindness of the gesture nearly undid her. "That's very thoughtful of you. And are you settling in?" Matilda hesitated. The proper response would be a cheerful affirmative, but something in Victor's direct blue gaze made her want to tell the truth. "Everyone has been very kind," she said carefully. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's not quite an answer." "No, I suppose it isn't." Matilda looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "It's all just happening very quickly." "The wedding is tomorrow, isn't it?" Matilda nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "And you're sure that's what you want?" Victor's voice was gentle, but the question hit Matilda like a physical blow. "I made a commitment," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Victor leaned forward, his expression serious. "Matilda, may I call you Matilda?" When she nodded, he continued, "A commitment made without full knowledge isn't binding in my book." "Did Watson tell you he's looking for a housekeeper more than a wife? That he has no interest in children, in building a family?" Matilda stared at him, shock rippling through her. "No, he didn't mention that." "I thought not." Victor ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "Watson is a good man in many ways, but he's set in his ways. After Eliza died, something in him hardened. He wants a quiet, orderly household and someone to cook his meals. That's all." "And you know this how?" Matilda asked, finding strength in her growing indignation. "Because he told me when he mentioned he'd sent for a bride. Said he'd found a quiet girl who wouldn't bother him with female nonsense, as he put it." The words stung, all the more because they confirmed the impression Matilda herself had formed over the past few days. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Nolan. Victor, please." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers before withdrawing. "I'm sorry if I've upset you, but I couldn't stand by and watch you make such a commitment without knowing the truth." "Why?" The question escaped before Matilda could stop it. "Why does it matter to you?" Victor's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Because from the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, trying so hard to be brave in a strange place, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." Matilda's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Nolan, Victor, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're kind and thoughtful. I know you put your family's needs above your own. I know your eyes light up when you look at the mountains, and you have a smile that could break a man's heart." He paused, then added softly, "And I know your shyness isn't a flaw to be mocked, but a treasure to be cherished." The words hung in the air between them, and Matilda felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. No one had ever spoken to her this way, had ever seen her quietness as anything but a defect to be corrected. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything right now," Victor said. "Just think about what you truly want. The stagecoach leaves for Helena tomorrow at noon. If you're on it, I'll understand. If you're not." He took a deep breath. "If you're not, I'll be in town, and I would consider it the greatest honor if you'd allow me to court you properly." The sound of approaching horses interrupted them, and Victor stood quickly. "That'll be Watson returning. I should go." "Wait," Matilda said, rising as well. "I need to think about all this." Victor nodded, his expression grave. "Of course. Whatever you decide, Matilda, I wish you happiness." He was mounting his horse as Emerson Watson rode into the yard with his foreman. The older man frowned at the sight of Victor. "Nolan," he called. "What brings you by?" "Just being neighborly, Watson," Victor replied, his voice carefully neutral. Thought I'd check if you needed anything from town tomorrow. Watson's frown deepened. We're fine, thank you. All right then. Good day to you both. Victor tipped his hat, his eyes finding Matilda's one last time before he turned his horse and rode away. Watson dismounted, handing the reins to his foreman before approaching the porch. What did Nolan want really? He asked, his tone suspicious. Matilda straightened her shoulders, finding an unfamiliar strength flowing through her. He came to tell me the truth, she said. About what you expect from this marriage. Watson's expression darkened. Nolan should mind his own business, perhaps, but I'm glad he didn't. Matilda met the older man's gaze steadily. Mr. Watson, I think we need to have an honest conversation before tomorrow. Inside, seated across from each other at the dining table, Matilda found her voice in a way she never had before. The words didn't catch in her throat, they flowed freely, powered by a newfound certainty. I came here prepared to be a true wife, she explained. To build a home, perhaps a family. If that's not what you're seeking, I think we both deserve to know now before vows are exchanged. Watson was silent for a long moment, studying her with narrowed eyes. Finally, he sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. You're right, of course. It was dishonest of me not to be clear from the start. He rubbed a hand over his face. After Eliza died, I swore I'd never put another woman through that risk again. I've no interest in children, Miss Owens, or in the kind of marriage that produces them. The confirmation hurt less than Matilda had expected, perhaps because deep down she'd already known. Then I think we both know this isn't right for either of us. To her surprise, Watson nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. You're a straightforward woman, Miss Owens. I appreciate that. He paused, then added, Nolan's a good man, better suited to a young woman's dreams, I'd imagine. Matilda felt heat rise to her cheeks. I didn't say anything about Mr. Nolan. A ghost of a smile touched Watson's lips. You didn't have to. I saw how he looked at you, how you looked at him too when you thought no one was watching. The next morning, Matilda stood on the porch of the Watson ranch, her valise packed beside her, watching as Mr. Watson's foreman hitched up the buggy that would take her to town. Watson himself stood awkwardly nearby. I've included 2 months' wages in that envelope, he said, nodding to the packet he'd given her earlier. For your trouble, and a ticket back to Minnesota if that's where you want to go. Thank you, Matilda said sincerely. That's very generous. Watson shrugged, embarrassment clear in his expression. Least I could do, no hard feelings, none at all. And it was true. In the clear light of morning, Matilda felt only relief and a growing excitement about the uncertainty ahead. I hope you find what you're looking for, Mr. Watson. And you, Miss Owens. He hesitated, then added gruffly, for what it's worth, I think Nolan would be a lucky man. The ride to town was filled with anticipation that bordered on fear. What if Victor had changed his mind? What if he wasn't there? What if she'd misunderstood entirely? Whispering Creek looked different somehow as they drove down the main street. The buildings were the same, but Matilda saw them with new eyes, not as intimidating symbols of her strangeness, but as potential landmarks in a new life. The stagecoach was already waiting outside the hotel when they arrived, passengers boarding for the journey to Helena. Matilda scanned the street anxiously, her heart sinking when she saw no sign of Victor. Miss Owens. The familiar voice made her turn, relief flooding through her as she saw Victor Nolan striding toward her, his face alight with hope and uncertainty. You're still here, he said when he reached her, sounding almost disbelieving. I wasn't sure. I'm still here, Matilda confirmed, a smile breaking across her face. The wedding is off, Victor's eyes widened. Watson agreed, more than agreed, he practically gave his blessing. She glanced at the stagecoach. I should get my ticket refunded. Does that mean you're staying? Victor asked, the hope in his voice unmistakable now. Matilda took a deep breath. If there's a reason to stay. There is, Victor said, reaching for her hands and holding them gently in his own. The best reason in the world, he paused, his eyes searching hers. I know this is sudden, and I meant what I said about courting you properly. We can take all the time you need. I'd like that, Matilda said softly, to get to know each other properly. Victor's smile was radiant. Then may I start by inviting you to Sunday dinner at my ranch tomorrow. Mrs. Cooper, my housekeeper, makes a roast chicken that would make angels weep. Matilda laughed, the sound surprising both of them with its fullness. I'd be delighted, Mr. Nolan. Victor, he reminded her, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. And speaking of places to stay, my sister Alina has a room to let above her millinery shop. She's a widow, very respectable, and I think you'd like each other. That sounds perfect, Matilda said, marveling at how easily the pieces were falling into place, as if the universe itself approved of this new direction. As they walked together toward the millinery shop, Victor's hand warm and steady against the small of her back, Matilda felt the last of her shyness melting away, replaced by a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with speaking loudly and everything to do with finally being heard. You know, Victor said conversationally, when I first saw you step off that stagecoach, looking so brave and so terrified all at once, I thought to myself, there's a woman with depths no one's bothered to explore. Matilda glanced at him, surprised. Most people just think I'm too quiet. Most people don't listen properly, Victor replied. Your shyness isn't a failing, Matilda. It's a reflection of how deeply you feel things, how carefully you consider before speaking. In a world full of people who talk without thinking, that's something to be treasured. As they reached the millinery shop, Victor stopped, turning to face her fully. I meant what I said yesterday. Your shyness is a treasure to me, not something to be fixed or mocked. I want to hear every word you choose to say because I know each one will matter. Matilda felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, of recognition. No one's ever understood before, she whispered. I understand, Victor said simply, and I'd like the chance to understand more if you'll let me. I will, Matilda promised, her voice clear and sure. I'd like that very much. And as they smiled at each other, standing in the middle of a dusty Montana street with the future spreading before them like an unwritten page, Matilda knew she'd found not just a man who accepted her quietness, but one who heard the volumes she spoke in her silence. It wasn't what she'd expected when she'd boarded that stagecoach in Minnesota, but it was infinitely better, a love born not from necessity or arrangement, but from true seeing and understanding. A love that treasured her exactly as she was.